My name is Lillie Cecelia Bliss, and I was born on August 26, 1877 in Tokerville, Washington County, Utah. Let me briefly tell you about my father and mother. My father was Norman Bliss. He was born in Hartwick, New York. My father learned how to farm and blacksmith. When he was 23, he married Mary Elizabeth, Eliza, Cole. Eliza had a son. They named Orley Dwight Bliss on July 25, 1839. Norman started hearing that Joseph Smith had seen a vision of God the Father and his Son Jesus Christ, and that an angel had shown him where to find gold plates in the hill Cumorah from which the Mormon Bible, as they call the Book of Mormon, was written. He learned that Joseph Smith had restored the Church of Jesus Christ. As Norman investigated the church, this angered his parents. When he was baptized on April 1, 1839, his parents disowned him and took back everything they have given him. Eliza was not pleased with the new religion. However, she promised to go along with Norman. They purchased a wagon and a team of oxen, loaded up all their belongings, and headed to Nauvoo. Norman was called on a mission to the Otsego County, New York area. He was excited to return and share his love of the Savior and his testimony with his family. He was unsuccessful in converting any of his family, but was successful in converting others. Eliza didn't stay in Nauvoo long after Norman left. She placed Orley with a neighbor and left. Norman returned to Nauvoo and took Orley back with him to finish his mission. Norman's parents refused to watch Orley unless he renounced his religion, which he refused to do. Norman's sister, Harriet, took Orley into her home, so he could finish his mission. When the Saints were driven from Nauvoo, Norman came across the plains with a Brigham Young company driving 2 wagons. One for himself and one for Brigham Young. He was a talented man and hard worker. He was a professional gardener and farmer. My father had 4 wives and 13 children. Norman married Lydia, my mother, in 1871. Lydia was the firstborn child of Allen Joseph Stout and Amanda Melvina Stout. They crossed the plains, and their stories are in Family Search found in the family tree. It was a hard, difficult journey. Lydia's schooling was very irregular but was as good as the majority of those at the time. Lydia watched her parents struggle with health and trials. She remembered how hungry she was as a child. When Lydia was 10, she would sit at the old cloth loom from morning till evening, spin wool into yarn, and knit socks for the family. When she is 13, she sewed all the cloth for the family. Pants, shirts, and dresses. Lydia was a very delicate, tall, slender, and bashful girl. She was afraid of the Indians, and would frequently give them biscuits that the family desperately needed. The Indians would come when all the menfolk were gone. Lydia married 3 times. Her first marriage was with Charles Emerson Griffin. This was a polygamous marriage and they had 1 son. Lydia lived in extreme poverty and was treated poorly by Charles. Lydia's uncle, Hosea Stout, visited her. He was Utah's first attorney general. He saw how poorly Lydia was treated. She was regarded as a slave, starving and malnourished. Hosea encouraged her divorce. Hosea provided her work so she could care for herself and the baby she was expecting. 4 years later, Lydia, Mom, married my father Norman Ingalls Bliss. She initially worked for Norman, who was a widower with 3 young children. Mom never goes hungry again. They have 5 children together: Fanny, Norman, me, Sanford, and Alfred. I was 5 years old when my father was killed in an accident. He had a mule team that ran away, throwing him off a load of hay, and under the mule heels and the wagon wheels. He passes away 5 hours later. Mom gives birth to Alfred 3 days later. Norman's death is a crushing loss to Mom, who was 33 years old at the time. Between Norman and Lydia and the marriages they had with other spouses, they had 20 children. Children came the first for Norman in 1839 and the last for Lydia in 1885, a span of 46 years. In 1884, Mom married Cyrus Morgan Jennings and they had a son, David Stout Jennings. This was during the raid of government marshals who were hunting for polygamist families. Her whole family lived in exile. The government marshals were at the place several times but never found her. When she returned to find her home and surroundings in such a sad condition, it nearly broke her heart. Cyrus did not dare be found on her property for fear that the marshals would get him. This was a terrible trial for both families. So, Cyrus thought it best that Lydia divorce him, since she was already sealed to Norman Bliss for eternity. 2 years later, Lydia and the children were finally getting their home the way they wanted when Lydia passed away. She was only 39 years old. Hosea Stout took her children to live with him and his wife. Lydia was a woman of great faith, and an active church worker. She worked on St. George Temple and did temple work after the dedication. She lived a life of trials and sacrifices and proved to be true to all her covenants and obligations. Her funeral was held in Tokerville, Utah, where she is buried beside Norman Ingalls Bliss Sr. in the Tokerville Cemetery.